My son Leo plays hockey. Anyone who's spent time in the rink knows that ice does not feel cold once a kid's been skating hard for 20 minutes. Leo sweats a lot. One practice a few years ago, I gave him 2 salt capsules, about 2,000 milligrams of sodium chloride. It's the Raymond hydration capsules before he skated out. No big production about it. I was studying water and electrolytes at the time in depth. So afterwards, he got in my car after practice, and the first thing he said was, "Mom, hey, I skated the whole practice and I didn't get tired." I looked at his undergarments, the one that are usually soaked through by the time he gets in the car, and they weren't, not even close. And that's not coincidence. That's physiology. Hi, I'm Dr. Emily Wheeler, and today we're talking about electrolytes. Most people think hydration is just about how much water you drink. And it's not. It's about whether your cells actually use the water once it's in you. So let's get into it. Let's start with the definition because I think this is where most people get tripped up. An electrolyte is simply a mineral that carries an electrical charge once it's dissolved in fluid. Sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, chloride, these are all minerals. And when they're dissolved in your blood, in your sweat, or the fluid inside and outside of your cells, they become electrolytes. And here's the confusion I hear all the time. People think minerals and electrolytes are 2 separate things, and they're not. Every electrolyte is a mineral. What makes it an electrolyte is what it's doing. It's carrying a charge, moving fluid, sending a signal. Okay, now here's the part I really want you to understand, the sodium-potassium pump. So every cell in your body has a pump built into its outer wall. Its job is to push sodium out of the cell and pull potassium in. It does this constantly as long as you're alive. Why does this matter for hydration? Well, because water follows minerals. Wherever sodium and potassium go, the water goes with them. This pump isn't just managing electricity, it's managing where water sits in your body. Inside the cell where it belongs, or outside the cell doing you no good. And that mechanism sits underneath everything that we're going to talk about today. So what does this mean for you day to day as you're doing this? These electrical gradients help your nerves fire, your muscles contract, and your heart beat. They also help your body manage where water goes and how it gets used. Hydration isn't about volume. It's about whether the pump has what it needs to move that volume where it belongs. You can drink a gallon of water a day and still be functionally dehydrated at the cellular level if you don't have the minerals to move it where it needs to be. So let's talk about who's most likely to be running low. Well, kids and athletes. This is Leo's story. He's an active kid, especially ones sweating through practices and games and multiple times a week. They lose sodium, potassium, magnesium, right alongside with water. And most parents think about hydration only in terms of drink more water, but that's just really half the picture. So we got kids and athletes. We also have winter. Now this might surprise you, and this is my hypothesis based on what I just see clinically, is that electrolyte needs may actually be higher in winter than in summer, depending on what you do. But essentially, we assume summer sweat is the big electrolyte drain. But I think what winter does, think indoor heating, running constantly, think dry air pulling moisture straight out of your skin, and most people drinking less because they're not thirsty the way they are in July. Less obvious sweat, but a steady, quiet fluid loss most people never account for. So coffee and caffeine drinkers are also people. Caffeine has a mild diuretic effect. In fact, it increases urine output and with it sodium and other electrolyte loss. This matters more than most people realize because coffee is often the first thing people reach for right in the morning before they've had any water at all. And many people are drinking 2 or 3 or 4 cups a day without even placing what's going on. And one nuance worth being accurate about is regular coffee drinkers build some tolerance to caffeine's diuretic effect over time. So it's not a one-to-one dehydration event with every single cup, but combine daily coffee with dry winter air, indoor heat, and low water intake, it adds up to a real quiet electrolyte drain that most people never connect back to their afternoon headache. Now, another area of people that might need electrolytes is low carb and paleo dieters. This one has real mechanisms behind it and it's worth understanding. So when you eat carbohydrates, your insulin rises, and insulin's job includes signaling your kidneys to hold on to sodium. When you cut carbs significantly, insulin drops, and your kidneys get the opposite signal. Let it go. Let that sodium go. This sometimes is called the natriuresis of low-carb dieting, and it's well documented. 2025 Scoping Review in Frontiers in Nutrition on a Ketogenic Diet Initiation confirmed this rapid sodium and potassium loss that happens in the first several days of carbohydrate restriction. And you might even realize this if you've done low carb or keto and you notice, man, I'm going to the bathroom quite a bit. As sodium exits, potassium and magnesium lend to follow. That's the mechanism behind the keto flu. The fatigue and the headache so many people blame on the diet itself when it's really just an electrolyte problem. Certain medications, okay, next one. This doesn't get explained often enough at the prescription counter. We'll go deeper into this section a little bit later, but several common medication classes can really deplete electrolytes, and sometimes significantly. Chronic stress. Your adrenal glands don't just make cortisol, they also make aldosterone, the hormone that governs how much sodium your kidneys hold onto versus release. And when you're under chronic stress, that whole system is working overtime. Higher, more sustained stress can mean a higher baseline need for sodium. You pull it all together, and here's the person I picture, okay? Someone drinking coffee every morning, eating low carb, staying active, sitting through winter next to a space heater, taking an antidepressant, we're going to get into these a little bit later, taking a blood pressure med, and running on chronic stress. Individually, each one of these is a small drain. You stack them together, that person is a walking case study in electrolyte need and dehydration. And most of them have no idea because no single piece of that picture looks alarming on its own. That's exactly the kind of pattern I want you to be looking for in your own life. Not one red flag, it's the accumulation of things. So let's talk about symptoms. What do you feel like when we are dehydrated, when we need the electrolytes? Think fatigue, headache, muscle cramps, dizziness, waking up in the middle of the night with a leg cramp. This is incredibly common and often blamed on just getting older or bad sleeping, when magnesium or potassium may be part of the picture. So most people have at least one of these symptoms without ever connecting it back to electrolytes. But here's what I want to add. The causes of dehydration people don't think about, okay? We automatically reach for Pedialyte the second a toddler starts vomiting or having diarrhea. We rarely extend that same logic to ourselves. Diarrhea, heavy sweating, even breathing through your mouth all night, being a mouth breather, that can meaningfully dehydrate you. And this one thing tends to get a laugh, but it's true. Here we go. Sex. Real, measurable fluid and electrolyte loss. Okay, passionate sex can actually help drain you. Take hydration seriously, not for our kids, but almost we never take it seriously for ourselves either. So let's talk labs. This is where I want to slow down because there's a lot of useful information here that most people never get walked through. What's on a standard panel? Sodium, potassium, chloride, CO2. They show up on any basic metabolic panel or comprehensive metabolic panel. Here's the important thing to understand how these numbers work. Your body works extremely hard, keeping that serum sodium and potassium in a tight, stable range, even at the expense of other systems. That means you can feel genuinely symptomatic and still have a normal number on paper. A normal panel tells you your body is compensating well enough to hold the line. You're staying alive. Good job. It doesn't tell you what it cost your body to hold that line. Two other conventional markers are more useful for spotting dehydration specifically than people realize. The BUN to creatinine ratio, that's an elevated ratio. It's a genuinely useful clue for dehydration. And in my experience, almost no one has ever had this explained to them with that, even if it's sitting right there on labs they've already had drawn. Also, hematocrit can also run falsely high when dehydrated, not because you have more red blood cells, this is a red blood cell marker, but because you have less plasma volume relative to those cells, plasma like the juice surrounding the cell itself. It is called hemoconcentration, and that's one more clue hiding in plain sight on labs that people rarely have. What I look at functionally that often gets skipped entirely is red blood cell magnesium versus serum magnesium. Serum magnesium is a genuinely poor reflection of what's happening inside your cells. Your body will pull magnesium out of tissue to protect that serum number. So it can look fine long after you're actually running low. Magnesium also works hand in hand with the sodium-potassium pump itself. So this matters directly for everything we've talked about today. Here's another one, urine-specific gravity. Urine. This is on a UA. Simple, inexpensive, and almost never discussed with patients, even though it's one of the most direct hydration markers available. Super easy to do. $7 on a lab work that I run. Osmolarity or serum osmolarity or when in the urine. So I want to, when I went more precise, I say more precise read on concentration than sodium. Osmolarity gives me that. So it's a concentration marker within the urine. Okay, here's a line I want you to remember from this whole section. A normal basic panel doesn't mean your hydration status is optimal. It means your body is compensating well enough to keep that number in range. Now, the medications. Okay, so I want to walk through these by what they're actually prescribed for, because most people know that they're on a blood pressure pill or an antidepressant. They don't necessarily know the actually drug class of the name. So let's connect the two, okay? If you're on a blood pressure medication, specifically thiazide diuretics, this is one known, okay? This is one to know. Thiazides are among the most commonly prescribed blood pressure medications, and they're also the leading drug-related cause of low sodium in research. Common examples include hydrochlorothiazide or chlorothiazidone and indapamide. Okay. A related group, loop diuretics, work differently in the kidney but pull sodium, potassium, and chloride out right along with that extra fluid. One of the most common is furosemide, also known as Lasix. Okay. If you're on an antidepressant for anxiety or depression, specifically an SSRI or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, these carry a well-documented dose-dependent risk of low sodium, especially in older adults. That risk rises significantly when an SSRI is combined with a diuretic. Common examples include sertraline or Zoloft, Lexapro, fluoxetine, Prozac. Those are some commonly known ones that can really pull that electrolyte need out. If you're on a seizure medication, also known as an anticonvulsant, you might be thinking, I've never had a seizure, so why would this apply to me? These medications are also commonly prescribed for nerve pain, migraine prevention, and mood stabilization. Examples are like carbamazine, oxycarbazepine, valproic acid. Disclaimer here, I am not, I don't prescribe medication. I just know what things deplete them. So I may be tearing these apart, but it is what it is. Correct me if you want, please. A 2025 review in the Journal of Biomedicines specifically identified thiazide diuretics and antidepressants as the leading drug classes behind drug-induced low sodium. In a study published in Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics, found that combining an SSRI with a diuretic significantly raises that risk compared to either medication alone. So combining them. So I'll ask the question I think is worth sitting with. Here we go. Does your doctor mention that did they mention this when they hand you the prescription? Most of the patients I talk to say no, they had no clue. This isn't a reason to panic or stop medication on your own. It's just a reason to know what to watch for and what to ask about. Okay, so let's make this practical. Food first, always. Let's dive into food and drinks. I want to go through my top 5 of high electrolyte foods. Okay, my top 5. Cooked spinach comes at number 1. That has 840 milligrams of potassium. Fantastic. Avocados has 975 milligrams of potassium. Fantastic. Banana, of course, you've already heard of banana, or may not, but banana has about half of that, 420 milligrams, mainly of the potassium. These are high potassium ones. Same thing with baked potato, also high potassium. Pumpkin seeds have a little bit more of magnesium in there, about 150 milligrams, which is right around what you would get like in a capsule of magnesium, and that's 1 ounce of pumpkin seeds. Super great. So those are high electrolyte foods. High electrolyte drinks, besides actually going and buying an electrolyte. Okay, so coconut water comes in at the top at 600 milligrams of potassium, and 250 milligrams of sodium. Okay, so a little bit more salt with the coconut water, but high potassium. Pickle juice. We're going to spend a little bit more on this later, but I love pickle juice for this. It's got a decent amount of sodium, 350 milligrams of sodium. Okay, sodium is going to be salt. Bone broth. This is also really high up there. This is fantastic if you're doing keto, if you're doing fasting to keep broth, that sodium in the this is the deal. Sodium can range in any type of bone broth from 200 to 900 milligrams, which is a decent amount, which is fantastic actually. Watermelon juice, a cup of it will give you about 170 milligrams of potassium as well. And of course, mineral water. If you're out shopping about, mineral water is going to be higher. And they range, different mineral waters range in difference of total dissolved solids, which we'll have a whole nother learning session about water. So, I like to point out this too. Mustard deserves its own mention. A spoonful straight up is an old athletic trick for muscle cramps, and it's almost entirely due to the vinegar and salt content hitting your system quickly. So here's a practical tip. Toss a few of those mustard packets in your kids' sports bags or your own gym bag or your bike pack. It's cheap, it's self-sustainable, it's stable, and it's really useful for mid-activity that you can pop in a mustard pack. But here's a quick myth bust here. Most bright colored sports drinks, they're mostly sugar with a small amount of sodium added. So they're just beautiful to look at and very marketable, but it's not the electrolyte powerhouse that some other products are going to have. Okay, or just food. One more thing worth naming here also that I find most of the foods that people blame on too much salt, like popcorn and pizza and pretzels and chips and French fries, they're actually more carb dense. They're carb and gluten heavy foods that happen to be salted. So salt isn't the issue. There's more on that a little bit later. Now, there's one food I want to get into more detail with. I want to, you ready for it? Pick apart the pickle because there's actually a surprising amount of nutrition science hiding in that jar. First, brine simply means salt dissolved in water. With many pickles, vinegar and spices are added too, and the salt isn't just there for the flavor. It traditionally helps preserve the food, control unwanted microbial growth, and keep the cucumber crisp. Pickles are made from cucumbers. The salty brine is also why the pickle juice can be such a concentrated source of sodium, one of the major electrolytes that we lose through sweat. But here's where it gets interesting. There are two different ways to make a pickle. With a vinegar pickle, you add the acid. Vinegar supplies the acetic acid. Acetic being spelled A-C-E-T-I-C, acetic acid, which creates that sour flavor. And vinegar consumed with or around a carbohydrate-containing meal may actually help reduce that post-meal glucose spike and improve insulin sensitivity, which is pretty cool. But a vinegar pickle is not automatically a probiotic. With a fermented pickle, this is the second type of pickle. We have a vinegar pickle and a fermented pickle. With a fermented pickle, you make the acid, the acetic acid. You start with cucumbers in a saltwater brine without adding vinegar. The lactic acid bacteria ferments sugars in the cucumber and produces lactic acid. If the finished pickles haven't been heat treated or pasteurized, they also contain live cultures there. So remember, the vinegar pickle, you add the acid. That would be the acetic acid. For a fermented pickle, you're making the acid. That's going to be lactic acid. Different forms of acids, but it's important for a pickle. Now let's pick apart the actual pickle. The cucumber itself is naturally low in carbohydrates and sugar, which is a bonus. The salt gives us sodium and electrolytes. The vinegar, when used, gives us acetic acid, right? Add fermentation when used, and that produces lactic acid and may provide live cultures. So try an unsweetened vinegar-based pickle at the beginning of your meal or with your meal, especially when you're eating carbohydrates. You're getting a low-carb food plus sodium, and the acetic acid may help blunt that glucose rise from the meal. But check your pickle label because not all pickles are created equal. So let's talk about the types of pickles here. We have a dill pickle is usually salty, sour, dilly, and garlicky with spices like mustard seed, peppercorns, and coriander. An unsweetened dill is typically very low in sugar. great to choose. A bread and butter pickle is sweet and tangy. It usually contains added sugar along with spices like mustard seed, celery seed, turmeric, and onion. Different spices, more sugar. And despite the name, there's no bread and butter in a bread and butter pickle. Oh, you wonder why? Well, the name is associated with an Illinois cucumber farmer's story named by Omar and Cora Fanning. This is their name, okay? This is their little story. In the early 1900s, in the 1920s, this is how it goes. The story goes that they traded jars of their sweet and sour pickles. That's what they were calling them, the sweet and sour pickles. So extra sweet and a little bit different flavors. At the grocery store, they traded them for staples, including bread and butter. So by 1923, they were using the name Fanning's Bread and Butter Pickles. So when you're standing in front of the pickle aisle, think about what you actually want. Do you want the electrolytes? Check the sodium. Do you want low carb? Look for an unsweetened dill. You want live cultures? Look for naturally fermented, unpasteurized pickles with live cultures that you'll typically find in the refrigerated section. You want blood sugar support? Choose a vinegar-based pickle without added sugar and try it with your meal. So there you have it. A low-carb cucumber, sodium-rich brine, acetic acid or fermentation, and a whole lot more science than you probably expected from a pickle. I just love pickles. So easy to make, super easy to make on your own, okay? So how does all this translate into real life? Getting back to the electrolytes. So Leo's story is the one I keep coming back to because it's the clearest real-world example I have. 2 salt capsules, about 2,000 milligrams of sodium chloride, salt, before a single practice, and a visibly different outcome. Sustained energy and dramatically less fluid loss. That's not magic. That's giving the sodium-potassium pump what it needs to do its job. Your water source matters too, not just the minerals you're adding through foods or supplements. And that's a whole full episode on its own, so I'll come back to that properly, okay? But before we wrap up, we need to talk about salt because you can't have an honest conversation about electrolytes without addressing one of the most misunderstood minerals in the American diet. I'm going to go through some myths here. Here's a myth. Electrolytes are only for athletes. Wrong. Not true. Anyone under stress, anyone on certain medications, anyone eating low carb, anyone in dry heated house all winter, all of these can create real electrolyte needs without a single workout involved. Myth number 2, more water always fixes dehydration. Well, sometimes it makes it worse. Drinking large amounts of plain water without adequate sodium can actually dilute your existing electrolytes further. This is the same basic mechanism, just less extreme, behind this exercise-associated hyponatremia that shows up in endurance sports research. You may have heard of people that are they're in marathons and they collapse because they're dehydrated, even though they're drinking a ton of water. They're missing the minerals. Okay, myth number 3. Minerals and electrolytes are different things. Wrong. As we covered earlier, they're not. An electrolyte is simply a mineral doing electrical work once it's dissolved in fluid, kind of like a brine. Brine is that dissolved fluid. Here's another myth. Salt causes high blood pressure. For everyone, always. No, wrong. This is one of the most successful public health myths of the last 50 years. And I think it's time we talked about what that actual research says. So briefly, Dr. James D. Nicolantonio is a cardiovascular research scientist and doctor of pharmacy. And his book called The Salt Fix lays out something most people have never heard. The research behind population-wide salt restriction is far weaker than the message surrounding it. And here's what he found. Roughly 80% of people with normal blood pressure show no meaningful blood pressure response to salt intake at all. They're simply not salt sensitive, even among people with pre-hypertension. That number is around 75%. So your kidneys are built to handle this. They filter somewhere between 580 and 650 grams of sodium a day, cycling through your entire blood volume roughly every 5 minutes, just managing sodium balance. This is not a fragile system. And the data on low sodium diets is more concerning than most people realize.
I found this on the web.
Oh my gosh. I guess I stimulated Siri with my podcast. It's taken care of. Hold on. Let me get back to my thought here with Dr. Dina Nicolantonio. So let's go back to the data on low sodium diets. So multiple studies, including large prospective cohorts, have found that people consuming the least sodium are actually at the highest risk of cardiovascular events and early death. Not the lowest. A low salt diet has been shown to raise heart rate, activate the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, RAA, and increase LDL and triglycerides, none of which is good for your heart. So D. Nicolatonio's Reed says that salt got blamed for a problem that isn't likely the primary driver of, while sugar and processed food quietly took a backseat in the conversation of it. So here's the part I think it's missed most. The salt usually isn't traveling alone. Think about the foods people actually associate with too much salt. Here we go again. Popcorn, pretzels, pizza, potato chips, french fries, saltine crackers, a bagel, breaded and fried foods like mozzarella sticks or fried chicken, ramen noodles. Salt is the seasoning, but the vehicle underneath it is almost always refined carbohydrate and gluten. White flour, fried starch, processed dough. That combination spikes insulin and drives inflammation on its own, with or without the salt on top. So when someone says, I ate too much salty food and I felt bloated and awful, what likely happened is a carb and gluten load, wearing a salt costume. Salt gets blamed for what the carbs and gluten actually did. A plate of grilled chicken with sea salt and a hard-boiled egg with sea salt doesn't produce the same reaction because the salt was never the problem to begin with. This is where functional medicine and salt actually line up perfectly. Your body needs sodium to function. For the sodium-potassium pump, for your adrenal system, for your blood volume, for your nerve signaling. Treating it as an enemy to minimize misses that entirely. And one honest note, I say this because I want you to really be fully informed. This view is different from standard low sodium guidance still given to people with an existing hypertensive diagnosis. And if that's you, this is exactly the kind of question worth bringing to your own doctor before changing anything. Not because the research doesn't matter, because you deserve to make that call with someone who knows your full picture. Okay, so hydration isn't just about how much water you drink. It's about whether your body has the minerals it needs to use that water well. So here are some questions to ask your provider regarding if you are hydrated adequately. Could my medication be affecting my sodium-potassium levels? Should we be looking at my BUN to creatinine ratio or hematocrit as part of my hydration picture? Is my current sodium intake actually appropriate for my activity level and stress load, not just a generic guideline? And if I'm on a low-carb, ketogenic diet, how should I be adjusting my electrolyte intake? So here's what I want to remember. Hydration was never about the water. Sodium, potassium, magnesium, chloride, and calcium are doing quiet, constant work behind every heartbeat, every muscle contraction, and every signal your nervous system sends. Sometimes a clue is a hockey kid who suddenly has the stamina to finish practice strong. Sometimes it's in the afternoon, it's that headache you keep blaming on stress, or the leg cramp that wakes you up at 2 a.m. Those symptoms aren't random, they're information. So the next time your instinct is to simply drink more water, pause and ask a better question. Does my body also need the minerals that help use that water? Does it? Thanks for spending this time with me today. I'm Dr. Emily Wheeler. Your symptoms are data. Your body is talking. Let's keep listening.